Hello and welcome. My name is Albert Bozazan, and today I'll show you two ways to get 3D fully textured models of your characters generated with AI and rigged and fully animated. Why two ways? Well, one of them will be completely local and also free, at least if you don't count the investment you made into a powerful PC. And the other method will be higher quality and honestly a little easier if you're willing to spend some money on today's video sponsor, Atlas, in their toolset Atlas Studio. More on that later. They've thankfully been open to this direct comparison, so I will show you exactly how to use ComfyUI, a tool called AccuRig, and Blender first, so you can achieve this goal completely on your own hardware. If you want to just straight skip all that ComfyUI Blender installation, workflow, building stuff, and get to the fast and higher quality version of this workflow, go to this timecode in the video and learn Atlas. Without further ado, let's get started. For both of today's workflows, we will be using this same character turnaround that I've prompted in a text-to-image model. You can create this any way you like. You can even illustrate it yourself if that's your jam. Anyway, this is the character we will turn into a 3D model and rig today. I have this full turnaround version, and I've also split it into 4 separate images for our ComfyUI workflow. First, we will require ComfyUI and a level of comfort in ComfyUI. So check out my previous tutorials on how to achieve that level of comfort. Then we will also need Blender, which is a pretty advanced open source software, but do not fret. You actually need absolutely zero skill set in Blender. We're only using it to convert one 3D model format into another. And then you'll also need to install AccuRig, which is free and local, but not open source. So that's completely by a different company who has commercial incentives. We'll be using it to rig. Why we're not using ComfyUI for that, I will show you later. Welcome to ComfyUI. Now, this is the currently newest update of ComfyUI Desktop as of the time of recording. You might have a different installation of ComfyUI, one you installed directly via command line and git clone, or possibly using my previous tutorial, installing ComfyUI using Stability Matrix. All of that is fine, but you should be comfortable using ComfyUI, troubleshooting. Like we all know if we've used ComfyUI a little bit that there might be problems installing various parts of it. This tutorial will require you to install some things from GitHub. Remember, everybody's setup of ComfyUI and their own home computer is completely different. So problems you might encounter may be completely unique to you, and I cannot diagnose them from afar. So do check GitHub issues, Reddit, all the usual places before you ask. What we're going to be installing is something called Trellis 2. This is a model provided by Microsoft using several other technologies from Facebook. So weirdly, we're still in that phase of open source where these companies that are literally suing each other in court are also working together building AI technologies. We're not going to question it. We're just going to be grateful. You might be tempted to go to extensions, or also known as the ComfyUI Manager, which has since been integrated, and just searching up Trellis 2. And you will find several results. But I've tried these for you, and unfortunately, they're very, very susceptible to breaking. So this one, you can see already, the description literally starts with the word warning, so not a good sign. Uses experimental package ComfyEnv. ComfyEnv has become my worst enemy over these past 24 hours. I encountered it when trying to figure out rigging for you in ComfyUI, because the most popular extension called Unirig also uses ComfyEnv. So if we look up Unirig, you'll see same warning. And it's actually not functional in the current iteration of ComfyUI Desktop, especially on my machine. So you might have a different experience. Please comment below if you do. If you get it working, I'd love to know. But my recommendation at this moment in time, do not install Trellis 2 or Unirig or anything involving ComfyEnv. There are a couple other options, but you see they're much, much older. So anything from 2025, don't touch it. We will get something much newer off GitHub, namely the original Trellis 2 ComfyUI wrapper by someone named Visual Bruno. So thank you, Bruno, for making this possible. And you'll see this is relatively new. The latest update was last month, so it's super current. and it is a way to use Microsoft's code within ComfyUI. So there's a bunch of very practical nodes that will help us turn an image into a 3D model with or without texture. It can also help us texture existing meshes using an image, so all kinds of fun stuff like that. The only thing, like I mentioned, you do need to be comfortable installing some things or interacting with an LLM to install them. So there's installation of wheels necessary, all of this sort of stuff that's specific to your machine. So you'll find the link to this GitHub in the description of this video below. And all you have to do is just follow these instructions step by step and get Trellis 2 installed. Once you've done so according to your ComfyUI setup, you can actually go into the folder itself of that custom node. In my case, that's hiding in my ComfyUI installs ComfyUI folder custom nodes. So you will see Trellis 2 in there. You can double click and there is a lovely folder full of example workflows. So there's mesh only high quality, low poly, multi-view. Basically, it's generating you a 3D model with not just the frontal view, so the classic where we give it a single image of our character from the front and it generates a model kind of guessing the back, but you can also give it left, right, and back views. If your character has a tail, for example, or a specific piece of clothing with a specific design on the back that you definitely want, multi-view will help you do that. So let's take this, drag it into ComfyUI, and immediately see it. It's a very nicely cleaned up workflow, so lovely. But immediately we're seeing some problems. So this is obvious error loading image. Well, the image isn't included in the workflow, so no problem. That's where we will be putting our custom images. But these are more relevant. You might encounter these errors here. So we might be thinking, okay, why is this number wrong? We click on it and we see that it is an option in the dropdown. Well, I have great news for you. You just select the number again and it'll work. So there's actually just a simple error in the code that is mistaking these so-called integers, so numbers, for a so-called string or a text that to our human eyes looks the same, but to a ComfyUI workflow are two very different items. So very simple fix. You literally just have to click the number again. You'll also see these alerts I've been ignoring for the past couple minutes. They look dangerous, right? Error loading model. Well, no, I've actually tried to figure out what they are, and they're simply complaining that there's no 3D model to be displayed in this 3D preview, which, yeah, exactly. We haven't made one yet. So you can totally just click these away. Absolutely no problem. So what I'm going to begin with is actually mesh with texturing. This is one of the workflows included with Trellis 2. And what it does is it takes a single image, in this case, the frontal view of your character, and turns it into a textured 3D model. What are the options? Let's go through it step by step. First of all, we have our name. I've just called this the mage. That's fine. Then we have the target face number. I think the default is actually really, really high. It's like 500,000. So we don't want that, especially not with the texture quality we're getting out of it. That makes no sense to get something as dense as 500K. So I'm going to go for 150,000, which also makes it comparable to the Atlas Studio option that I'm going to introduce to you later. Then we have texture size. Don't go overboard with this. 1024 is fine to test. I think 2048 is a good number that takes advantage of the AI model without asking too much of it that it just can't deliver. And then down here, you just drag in the frontal view of your character. Let's follow this. So image with alpha can go into pre-process image. Of course, this image doesn't have any alpha, so transparency, and we're going to need it to create a 3D model. So if it's not already checked, make sure remove background is on. Otherwise, you're going to get a completely flat 3D model because it thinks you want that gray as part of it. So no, we don't want that. We want to remove it. Up here is where the model is loaded itself. So Trellis 2, you'll see model name, Microsoft Trellis 2-4B. So this, of course, depends which ones you've installed using the instructions on GitHub, but this is the one I have. Backend, I'm going to use SDPA. You can also use Flash Attention. In my opinion, it's a little bit faster, but the quality suffers a little bit with my tests. And Flash Attention is its own little ComfyUI installation nightmare that I don't want to put you through. So let's stick to SDPA. Device, CUDA. You're going to need to use CUDA, so I strongly recommend using an NVIDIA GPU. Low VRAM. I've turned this on, I've turned it off. It works on my 3070 either way. These you don't have to change. So now you see where the ComfyUI kind of classic workflow complexity comes into play. Most of these nodes are just here. You don't need to understand or touch them. And this is where that mesh texturing starts happening. So only here is the texture generated along with UVs for the model we need. And then it's exported. So let's give that a run. Here we have our first model out of Trellis 2 using just a frontal image. And you see, I think, if we're totally honest, the main issue with this is texturing. So you're probably not going to get a 3D model out of your local ComfyUI setup without having to do significant edits. And you see the main struggle is with faces. So the rest, I would say if we're making like a phone video game or something, like a mobile game, it's fine. Actually, the metallic was well recognized. You can see the belt buckle is metallic while the cloth isn't, but you might have to reproject your face onto it using a tool like Stable Projector Z, for example, which has actually been around for quite a while and uses your local setup to reproject textures onto it, lets you paint. But generally, it guessed the behind look quite well and is decent. And you see it saved it into this. But before we move on to next steps of how we can like rig this model, I also want to introduce you to Mesh with Texturing Multi-View. So this is the default workflow that the Trellis 2 Comfy extension provided by itself. But I noticed pretty early that it doesn't just take the front and back images, you can also plug in left and right images. So I prepped that for you. All I did was import my various views from this character and plugged them in to a preprocessor each, remove background on, remember, and put those in here. So once you've run through this, you'll see something like this character. And immediately you'll notice the textures are honestly worse. So how can this happen? Well, because in especially AI-generated character turnarounds, they might not have perfect overlap in the different angles. So it has to create an average of left and front, for example, like where the eyes are, where the details are, and it might turn pretty muddy like this. This is a pretty cool workflow if you want a 3D model on your own machine at your own just like pure electrical cost versus any subscriptions or credits. But what do we do with a model like this now if we want to rig it? Obviously, if we're creating a character, we probably want to move that character and not keep him in T-pose. I did mention early on when we were talking about installation that I tried really hard getting a automatic rigging workflow going in ComfyUI called Unirig. So it is available in extensions if you want to give it a shot. Here it is, Unirig. And at the time you are watching this video, this might be fixed. It might be functional in current versions of ComfyUI, which use Python 3.13. Unfortunately, in my reality right now, it isn't functional, and I've opened GitHub issues about it. So instead, in keeping with my goal of showing you a completely free and local version of this workflow, we're going to be using something called AccuRig. It's not open source, it is provided by a company, but it's a very powerful way to semi-automatically, or even automatically if you're lucky, rig humanoid characters. You're going to get it on a site by ActorCore, and it's called AccuRig 2, free auto-rigging and motion retargeting for 3D characters. And you can just download the app for free onto your machine, at which point you might immediately notice a slight problem. Please drag and drop a character file here, FBX or OBJ. Why is that a problem? Well, if we take a look at our ComfyUI workflow, it's exporting a so-called GLB file. You can click in the dropdown and pick OBJ, but OBJs don't intrinsically have textures with them included. FBX isn't available at all. So that's why I mentioned at the start that Blender will be involved here. And what we're going to do is we're going to pick the prettiest version of our character, so probably not this one. You can find the path here and open up Blender. You don't need to set anything up. If it looks different, no problem. All you need to do is select this cube just by clicking on it, hitting X and delete. So enter or click. And then what you do is you find your GLB in your ComfyUI outputs, according to that path we just saw, drag and drop. So it's going to open this little menu. You don't need to change anything at all. Import GLTF. GLTF, GLB, same thing. And now you'll see your character in here, inside of Blender. If you want to check if the textures came along correctly, you can also pick this viewport shading button here, Material Preview, and you'll see, yep, they're all here. So make sure you have that character selected. We're going to click File, Export, and here you see FBX. So this is the file we need. Place it where you like. I'm just going to call him Mage. And what you have to do in here is path mode, copy. This is putting the textures into the FBX. And make sure you click this little button here, Embed Textures. Limit to selected objects. And that's all you need to do. Export FBX. Now we can go to AccuRig. Go to where you saved your model and drag and drop. And here's the character. So you see it's already guessed the center of the character correctly. So this is the first step. If it gets it wrong for whatever reason, you can also rotate your character with these buttons. You can also move the center line if you'd like. And then all you do is click Rig Body. Now, this part might take a little bit, especially evaluating body joints. So we'll be back in a few minutes. Here we get to make sure everything is set up correctly. So fortunately, if we hover over that joint on the right, it's going to show us where it needs to be. In this case, it's actually up a little bit. So I'm going to move it down under his nose. He's got a wide stance, my guy. So now what we could do is also move on to rig hand. Number of fingers. Well, we do technically have 5 fingers, but if we look closely at this model, they're pretty connected. On the local models, we're probably not going to get that high level of a finger detail to make it worth rigging the hands. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to select 0 fingers and hit next. Now it's calibrating a little bit so we can adjust posture, and we're immediately going to see our character moving around. So he's looking around. And the point of this exercise is to make sure that there's not too much overlap happening in these models. So you see his arms might be a little close by his sides because he's not low poly, but he's stylized in such a way that we might have to adjust some of these things. The final mode in AccuRig is the so-called Add Motions tab. Now, this is full of advertising. This is how they make their money. They're selling animations, but they didn't sponsor this video. So all we're going to do is click there and export. Export FBX. I'm going to pick Blender, huge fan, and you can choose character only or motion only or both. And all I need is the character, embed, and export. Now I'd like to show you an alternate way to achieve these results, honestly quite a bit better, with today's sponsor, Atlas Studio. Now, if you've been around on my channel for longer, you'll know I don't take on many sponsors, especially not sponsors where I present an entire workflow using their product. But Atlas reached out to me a couple weeks ago and let me demo their studio, and honestly, I was really, really impressed. So what exactly impressed me about it? On their homepage, if you scroll down, you might already get an idea of what their product is. It looks pretty familiar. It's node-based, just like ComfyUI. But what I really appreciate is that you don't need nearly as many nodes or need to spend as much time to build a functional workflow as you would in a traditional ComfyUI one. But there's another very specific feature of Atlas that I'd like to use to introduce you to it that really blew my mind. Once you're in, you'll get greeted by this project view. You can see I've already played around with our workflows here. And up here, you have different workspaces. So for example, if you're working in different teams or have vastly different projects that you'd like to keep apart, you can organize them up here. Over here, you have 2 different views, projects and exported APIs, which is also kind of a neat feature. Once you've set up workflows, you can use APIs to access them. So if, for example, you're working on a video game that wants to let your users create new characters or items for your characters, you can create an Atlas workflow and have your game access it to generate things. But let's stick to our workflow today, and I'm going to create a new project. Just going to call it demo, add a description, and hit create. This is a pretty standard node-based canvas. You'll know it from ComfyUI or Blender shader nodes, geometry nodes, that sort of thing. If you right-click in the canvas, you'll open up a little node search box, and you'll see all the different types of nodes. So you'll have inputs, all the basic stuff, text, images, numbers. I appreciate that they're actually sorted like this because they don't make a difference whether it's, a type of media asset like a video or audio, or even just something like number or text. It's different in other UIs. So very, very good idea to sort them like that. And this is where it starts getting really interesting. So they actually put workflows into nodes rather than technical functionality. So let's say if in ComfyUI, you have a node that just loads an AI model, that sort of feature will be inside another node here in Atlas because we don't think in technical features like that. We think in how do we get from A to B. So here you'll have text to image fast as a node in itself. So that's just one node with the prompt in there, the resolution, the engine, so the actual model, and in the end, you'll have an image. So that's all in one node. Really, really cool. Of course, if you want to input the prompt separately, you can still input text, put your prompt in there and connect it. Absolutely no problem. And of course, the output image, you'll get suggestions. Let's say you want to animate that image. You'll just look for image to video and get that plugged into your reference or first frame, whatever model you're using. And here you'll see this is model agnostic. So you'll have all of the known commercially available models like Veo, like Seedance, and you don't have to use different nodes for any of those. So I much appreciate that. I'm just trying to get a video. I don't need to remember what node Seedance needs versus what node Veo needs. So you immediately see why I like it. Basically to have a text to image and then to video, it's two nodes. You generate your image, you generate your video. Very, very cool. That's not the feature I wanted to share with you though. That's standard. You would expect this to be here. It's this whole area over here, the so-called assistant. I do have to preface, I'm very critical of this trend of agentic workflows coming out lately. I've taken a look at a lot of products that ask you to just prompt your video idea and press generate, and out comes a short film that has absolutely nothing to do with your creative vision. I'm not on board with that. I still want to keep control, and I like interacting with LLMs that are smart and understand what I want to do and understand what product they're actually in. This was the first thing I tested with Atlas to see if their claim is actually as good as they say. And instead of talking about it, let's just do it. We have a concrete use case that we want to create, so let's just describe it. You can choose your model. I'm going to stick to Gemini 3.5 Flash and say, I need a workflow that takes a character turnaround sheet with 4 views, the one you've seen, front, back, left, right, splits them into separate images. So let's see if that actually works. That's a manual step I'd prefer not to do if I'm working with a lot of different characters, and generates a 3D model from them using all views. Then it should rig the character and show me a selection of example animations. As a final step, just so it has something to work with, I am going to actually give it that image. So let's take the one that's not split yet and just upload it in here. Let's hit enter. So you see it saw that there's one node with one image in there. It searches its own node library to see what nodes might be necessary. There was one little execution failure. We'll see what that means. And it already created my workflow. So that was almost real time. I only cut out some breathing room. I've successfully created and configured your character processing workflow. What was done? Split character sheet node. So that's, I'm assuming this one that's already generating. It takes the 4-view character sheet from your input image and automatically extracts the front, right, left, and back views. Multi-view 3D node. So you see this is just one node that creates a high-quality 3D mesh from the multiple views. You don't need to load anything. That's all in one node. Then a rig humanoid mesh node. That rigs it, obviously, and then animate rigged mesh nodes. So you'll see this first one, it has already split them. Looks pretty good. It cut off the hair a little bit here. Of course, it wasn't able to do what I did in Photoshop, namely, remove little elements of other views that overlap. But we'll see if it can handle that. It actually finished the 3D model a little quicker than it said, around 2 minutes, 30 seconds. You can take a look here by clicking. And here we go. Yeah, solid model. The 3D viewer is also full screen, which I appreciate. And let's use this to check out the 3D viewer. So we have a couple lighting options here. Soft Studio, there's Classic, which seems to just be a light from the top. Then there's Even Light, which lights it evenly. Big surprise there. The current view is so-called Beauty. Let's check out the albedo. So this is like the diffuse materials, just the pure color, no metallic or roughness, specular, that sort of thing. Combined normals. You'll see this is actually a very, very detailed model, so very high mesh density. You can see it's set to auto, so I don't know exactly how many faces there are. Roughness, so this is where you see the hair is more rough than the skin. Basically, otherwise, there's not that much of a difference. I think it recognized a little bit that this could be glass here, the thing he has on his belt. Metallic, practically no metal except for the top of the bottle, so that's actually surprisingly detailed there. And wireframe. Yeah, that's an extremely dense mesh. We're going to have to reduce that. You can also download it right here. It's now generating the rig, but I actually want to see what other models are available because I know this is not the highest quality model we have in a commercial sense. So online paid cloud-based models are actually quite a bit better than the open source ones. So I would like to see something like Meshy V6. I've heard this is incredible. I keep getting a ton of ads for it. So we're going to do that. And we're going to wait for just 1 second to see this finish. Let's check out the other features. You can change the seed, of course, just to get a different variant if you don't like what's been created, but it's going to be different with Meshy anyway. Then you have face count. So the API default, I think, is pretty high. You can also set it to custom and then, okay, 300,000, for example. Let's do that. And you'll see some Meshy specific features popped up automatically. Image autofix, that's a Meshy feature. Sounds good, we're going to do it. D-Light, very important if you're going to be using this in any context. You want a model that doesn't have the shading necessarily of the original image. You want to be able to change that in 3D software, for example. So D-Light, great feature, let's leave that on. And there's also texture reference image, which we don't have in this case. So up here, you can see that there are 2 buttons, actually. This one runs the whole workflow again from the start, and this one lets us run just this node again. Here's the Meshy V6 model. Generally, the textures are much more detailed. You can see some issues here that we'd need to fix later on. And the face generally, which of course is quite important, looks much better than Tripo. He does have some weird artifacts here on the side of his face, which I would polish up using sculpting in Blender, for example. But generally, I do like this more. You can see it did struggle with those pieces that were not removed in the character sheet split. So if you're doing this in Serious, either you decide, okay, you leave it in and remove it in 3D later, or you do clean up your input rather than doing that automatic splitting. So that's up to you. The rig humanoid mesh is done. Let's check out what it did. Yeah, did pretty well. Here the foot's a little sideways. Probably confused by this element here. Otherwise, looks decent. It also gave us some example animations built in. Yeah, head's a bit crooked. And exactly as I thought, this thing is attached to the foot. Yeah, decent. So this is a workflow I got by just straight up prompting the agent. Now that we've seen the agentically prompted version of this workflow, let's check out one that the Atlas team themselves sent to me for this purpose. There are a few significant differences that I'd like to highlight. So we know the splitting character sheet and the input image, and even the multi-view 3D. We've seen these nodes, but you'll notice there is an Atlas rig T-pose humanoid node that the agentic workflow didn't have. And this is actually their own proprietary model for rigging models that have fingers. So instead of relying on external models, they can change, the providers can change the different APIs. Atlas actually, because they've focused on high quality assets like this, created their own model that I would like to showcase for you in this specific sanctioned workflow that I didn't prompt myself. So I've already added my little character turnaround sheet. I'm not going to clean it up. Let's see what they can do. And I'm going to hit this final node in the end of the workflow. So remember, there are two options. You can run an individual node just with this normal play button, or you can run all the predecessors that maybe haven't generated yet all the way to the end of the workflow. So basically, if you want to run a workflow from start to finish, this is the button you press on the last node in it. Let's take a look at the results. So first, the actual 3D model itself. This used Tripo. Yeah, pretty much as expected. This is what we saw earlier as well. Very nice detail on the background, actually. Very nice detail on the back, actually. So this is what we have in our back view that we wouldn't get with just the frontal view. We have the little bottles here. So again, if I were making a mobile game, this would be really, really good. And with some further texture cleanup, I think we could get pretty far. And now the actual rigging. So Atlas Rig claims to be extra detailed with hands and fingers, especially if there are fingers. So let's see. Yeah, that's very, very promising. So here we have the Atlas Rig specifically, and it tried to get those finger details. So we see that Tripo actually managed to separate the fingers mostly, could use a little bit of cleanup. And then the Atlas rigger got the positions of the fingers nearly right. So the Atlas team themselves are actually super open about this. So they wanted me to share that this is a very early version of their product and their model. So there might be some slight inaccuracies, but honestly, I think this is pretty good. So with some very easy changes in the 3D software of your choice, this definitely already saved me quite some time in rigging, even if I were using other assistive tools to rig. This was just a click and a short wait, so pretty cool. The feet, good. Let's see how it is in motion. Standard walk. Okay, that's a little rough. Gotta admit, that needs some adjustment, some offsetting. And Gangnam Style, let's watch it. Is it just me, or did he get like a little bit more of a smirk? I think the mesh generation actually had some trouble getting the beard separated from the neck, and it becomes very clear in this dance. So that's pretty fun. Yeah, but generally, I'm impressed. This is pretty cool, and I especially appreciate the simplicity of both the workflow and just, in the end, having to click generate to get it. I can download and open this in any place of my choice. So let's do that in Blender. We have the same little importer here. And there we go. It seemed it kept everything. So the textures are on there, and we have our rig immediately functional in Blender. We don't have to change any settings. Everything is correctly parented and ready to animate. Pretty neat. So I'm impressed. This is very cool. And remember, this is how far we get using just AI. I've not done any manual cleanup of this process. Literally, all I did was import my full character turnaround image. So just a 2D image that I prompted with pure text, and it generated the mesh, it textured it, it rigged it, and even animated it. Thank you so much to Atlas and Atlas Studio for being the sponsors of today's video, providing access, and also giving you a 50% off discount code Albert on any purchase. So scroll down, click the link in the description, enter code Albert, and have twice the fun trying out your own character generations or all of the other stuff Atlas is capable of doing. Seriously, try out the agentic thing. type in any workflow you could imagine in media asset generation in that space, and I think you'll be very impressed by what it can do and how much time it can save. Being someone who has to use these tools professionally, I know it can be fun tinkering with workflows and building them manually, but when you need to meet a deadline and you have a little bit of budget, seriously, this is the way to go. Go check them out. Thank you for watching today's tutorial. If you learned anything, and I mean anything at all, seriously, think back the last couple minutes. Did at any point your brain go, ping? Ah. If yes, please scroll down a little bit and hit that like and subscribe button with the bell on to make sure you don't miss any future videos where your brain could do that again and make you smarter. My name is Albert Bosazan, and I hope you have fun with generative AI. See you soon.